Hello. I'm so happy today to have Shaun Miller, the Senior Director of Operations and Sustainability at Envita Solutions, join us. Shaun, just so that you know, we do so many episodes and conversations around creation of materials. And we've been actually really keen on finding people who are doing the end of the pipeline work. So I'm so happy that you were able to join us today, and I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Let's start with things that we don't know about you. Let's talk about Shaun Miller, the person first, and then we'll move to Envita. Tell us more about your growing up years, and in case there were things in that time that kind of drove you towards the direction where you find yourself today in terms of sustainability and waste management. Were the things that influenced your uh, thought process?
Well, I grew up in central Indiana and inevitably went to Indiana State to focus on psychology in my undergrad degree. So I think a lot of people who find themselves in the sustainability space, God bless those that have a natural born passion for it. But I think many of us end up there by serendipity or happenstance and fall into it and then never escape, but never want to leave either. And that's kind of how I found myself into it. I graduated from Indiana State with a bachelor's degree in statistical psychology, and then I went right from that into a career, and actually was the general manager and ran a fine dining restaurant in Terre Haute, Indiana, for the better part of 10 years. So I started in hospitality, but and believe it or not, that might have been some of my first foray into the sustainability space. I mean, we went through so many wine bottles and scotch and all these organics leaving out and scrap food that I did find myself partnering with some like-minded folks internally to develop recycling programs and take-back programs for some of our packaging and dunnage. I developed either donations to food kitchens with the leftovers or started implementing composting and all these things. So at that time, I wouldn't say that it was my passion or my spark, but it was the first time that I began to kind of toy with it. And really, again, how I ended up in the sustainability space is that's in Terre Haute, Indiana, and here I am in my early to mid 20s, and it's really nice to have a managerial role in this degree, but like that's where I found myself. We wanted to start a family, so I actually got a recommendation from my brother-in-law, David Kripe, who had worked for Heritage Environmental Services in their fields group, and said, "Hey, I know you are kind of figuring out how you can be closer to home because in the hospitality industry, you lose your weekends and your holidays and your evenings, and it's a long commute because I was actually living in Indianapolis. So I said, all right, I'll come work for Heritage, and I had took a little bit of a humble approach and knew I was going to wear a tie-back suit in the back of an AOD trailer and shovel hazardous waste for 60 hours a week, but it was got me closer to home and got the bills paid. And the Heritage Group in general has been a really excellent experience for me and for my family because every time that I thought, okay, now it's time to spread my wings and go find out what I really want to do, they gave me a reason to stay. So I moved from the hazardous waste space, working in for Heritage Environmental, over to one of their subsidiaries, which is then called Heritage Interactive Services, to do total byproduct management, which I'll get into here in a little bit, but it's management of all waste streams that leave a customer's facility. Everything that leaves their site that's not a person or a product, it's a scrap or a commodity or a waste stream. We support those, and I really enjoyed that. Not that I wasn't, really excited to continue to be shoveling hazardous waste and working with hazardous waste, but to get to be more of a kind of a white glove integrated sustainability partner for customers and touch all waste streams with a much broader scope. And then you kind of fast forward, I grew up through Heritage Interactive Services. Of course, we rebranded a few years ago as Envita Solutions. And for those who aren't familiar, Envita is N-E-N for environmental, and Vita, which is Latin for life. So that's where we got Envita Solutions. And so I've gone through and been, program manager and operations manager and a director of operations. I actually approached my leadership at Envita a couple of years ago because again, I mentioned I went right from school into a career in hospitality. And at that point, I had really begun to develop an affinity for specifically the sustainability space. And although we provide a lot of innovative solutions for our customers' byproducts that are leaving their facility, where I really found a spark was working with companies like Climeco, which is a sister company of ours at the Heritage Group that operates in the carbon credits and carbon sustainability consulting space. I really liked that. And so I'd always planned to go back and get my MBA at some point. And it just so happened I was on a conversation with one of our customers, who I'll leave their name out of it, but they had mentioned they're headquartered out of Central Arizona, and they had mentioned that a few of their executive team had gone and gotten their masters in sustainability leadership at ASU, Arizona State, Forks Up. That kind of sparked for me. It's like, all right. So I approached my company and said, look, we don't have at the moment, we do all these great things for our customers, but we really don't have an internal thought leader and an internal change management person that is working on our own internal sustainability journey. So from there, I went and got my master's in sustainability leadership at ASU, and kind of used that as an opportunity to build out my current position, which is still a bit of a hybrid, but a senior director of operations and sustainability. So man, that's a long-winded journey that I just gave you, but like that's how I fell into it. It's just as life came and you embraced it, you eventually didn't really know what I wanted to do when I grew up, and so now I sit here at 40 years old and wish I could go back to younger Shaun and be like, no, you really like to do this, to focus here, because it kind of took me a long time to get where inevitably I didn't know that I wanted to be until I was there. So there you go.
Oh, that's wonderful because you actually answered a lot of my questions as you were speaking, which is great because I was wondering, what both Alex and I were wondering what Stables was, and and we were kind of looking it up, and now I know
Yeah.
it was a fine dining restaurant, and of course, I was going to ask you now how the Heritage Environmental Services became Envita, and you just kind of it was right on the mark on the rebranding and coming together, but that leads me to the question of I know that it's a fourth generation family business, and that speaks volumes as well. And of course, your own
Certainly.
experience has been so positive, and you've been there for such a long time. But talk to us about the evolution of this business. How did it start? How did the four generations back? How did they conceive it? And how has it evolved to how where it stands today? It'll be great to get that idea so that we can build from there.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that Fred Fazenfeld Sr., started a small oil and gas company out of a pickup truck. From there, that kind of grew and moved into some asphalt companies and things of that nature. There's a huge story there that I'm not the right person to articulate the best, but I will say that around about the 70s, being in the used oil and petroleum industry and asphalt, they were generating a lot of waste. And the Fazenfeld family and that culture and that group has always been really good about taking challenges, whether it's our customers' challenges or our own internal challenges, and figuring out how to turn those into opportunities, either whether it's for society or for the planet or for people or for a business. So they invested in and inevitably developed their own hazardous waste company, which became Heritage Environmental Services, so that they weren't just having these negative externalities from their actions and from their business. They were actually creating solutions for their own byproducts. So that's how that Heritage Environmental business, that hazardous waste business, began. Round about the mid to late 70s. Then you fast forward to 1999, and they had Heritage Environmental as a premier hazardous waste organization, obviously still by that time. They had customers approaching them and saying, we love what you do with our hazardous waste, the knowledge, the compliance, the solutions, the service. How do we do that with more than just our hazardous waste? We have trash and we have wood and we have absorbents and we all these things. And so Ken Price at that time, part of the Heritage family, came up with an idea, and with collaboration and partners from many others throughout the ecosystem. And that's how they acquired a company at the time. It was called Allegiant Global, and they became Heritage Interactive Services, which at that time was a subsidiary of Heritage Environmental. And starting with a few customers, primarily in the automotive and some aerospace, and began taking everything and being the billing agent and the service provider and the vendor management and the data provider and the invoicer for absolutely everything. So they had a one-stop shop, total waste. And we like to think that we were, as Heritage Interactive Services in 2000, 2001, one of the first to be doing it well and be doing that TWM model in the mainstream and in the market. So that's how the company started, and then we separated from Heritage Environmental back around 2020. We were seeing a much larger and much different um, uh, target audience or market audience than Heritage Environmental was. Very specific to hazardous waste. Still a very sustainable company, but they have assets, treatment disposal facilities and incinerators and landfills, and the total waste management model was built around being not tied to assets. So as we began to grow, the decision was made. It's like we have a different market audience. We have a different service that we're providing, and we had grown Heritage Interactive Services to become a completely separate service provider where you had Heritage Environmental. It's a hazardous waste company, right? You have the best that's out there. Heritage Interactive Services is providing integrated sustainability solutions, total waste management, like very different segments at that point. So we spun out, became our own entity. And then you fast forward to 2000, or was it June 2023? We eventually rebranded to kind of step out into the market and say, hey, we're here. Because honestly, that growth rate year over year has not slowed down. That's very accelerated growth, driven in part not just by the value that HES brung and the Heritage Group brings, but because sustainability is quite frankly how business is done today. It's not one of those, it's not a fad and it's not a gimmick and it's not something that's a nice to have. It has become part of the total value proposition for enterprises, both in the public sector and the private sector. And I think that decisions are being made by shareholders and the up and coming generations that are based upon not just the P&L, but what some of those ESG components look like and what the total value proposition is for an organization, where they're getting their raw materials and what they're doing with their waste and how their impacts affect their surrounding communities. So that really enabled us to grow as an organization, and something that we anticipate will continue to do because of those factors.
Oh, that's a brilliant story. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the ambition of becoming a $1 billion organization. And it's especially wonderful because you're doing it while doing such a good thing by managing waste and doing it well, and you're growing a behemoth of a business, which is wonderful. And you mentioned this. It'll be great. It's a great place to step into this idea of total waste management solution that Envita provides today. So tell us more about what that entails when you say it's a complete waste management solution. What is the kind of customer you look for? What are the waste lines that you get into? And then just a primer on how you kind of segregate and divide and manage
Sure.
that waste. And then, of course, we can jump into all the different bits after that.
We're very nimble and we're very flexible with our customers. So I wouldn't say that we specifically target a market. Like, we're a very diverse portfolio and we don't necessarily target a portfolio size for an organization. Our job is to be adaptable to and meet our customers wherever they are at in their journey. It's also very dependent on the user, the generator, the customer, on what they are specifically looking for. As a total waste management provider, we will manage, and this answers one of your questions, everything that leaves a customer's facility. So hazardous waste, solid waste, and trash, obviously recyclables, commodities, scrap metal, cardboard, plastics, you name it. But then also the absorbents and pallets and the medical waste and the e-waste and the sharps and radioactive sludge, swarf, plating cake. What do you got? It's everything under one roof. Now, we do that by being a solutions provider, and we kind of enable collaboration across the entire sustainability and waste ecosystem. So when we begin working with a new customer, we traditionally roll them over. We become their billing agent so that we're managing all the vendors. We're providing consolidated invoicing, usually one invoice per facility for absolutely everything. We collect all the supplier backups, so all the data that being driven by supplier invoices and manifests and profiles and weight tickets and everything. We're collecting all that, and we're using that data to output into our proprietary software so that they can drill in either at the site level or at the corporate level, depending on what the system has been calibrated for in the user, to see with whichever time frame, whether it's they've only been working with us for 3 months or for 20 years, they can choose um, whichever time frame they want to see, and they can see absolutely every waste stream, byproduct, scrap, commodity, everything that's been picked up, the weight, the service provider, the backup documentation, manifest numbers, VOLs, the price, obviously, the volume, the number of hauls, the carbon impacts of their services, absolutely everything under one roof. And they can see that in like nice and bright, shiny dashboards, which they can drill into for deeper and deeper analytics. But also it outputs the micro information in Excel, so that it helps their sites with their internal and external KPI reporting, but it also gives our stakeholders at the corporate level the ability to make meaningful decisions and using some of those predictive analytics in order to manage their environmental and sustainable side of their business, and then really come to us. It is a push and pull. It enables our customers to do that, but then we have our actual team doing the same thing on their behalf. And then once we get everything switched over and billing through us, that as that data builds up, we baseline the business for about 6 months and then annualize that out. And then really we kick off from there under whichever contract goals that our customers have given us that are meaningful to them. So for and really legacy, it's been a lot of zero waste to landfill diversion, but we stay ahead of the trends as best as we can, and we try to keep up and adapt with the changing sustainability context on a global scale. So a lot of our customers' focus is waste minimization, increasing the recycling percentages, decreasing their scope 3 carbon impacts of their services. And with that, you have customers that are very, cost sensitive too, and are seeking efficiencies and cost reductions. So we're leveraging our suppliers in the market, our own in-house expertise, our partners at the Heritage Group, and everybody else in the sustainability and waste ecosystem in order to achieve those things for them. Because we're not tied to assets specifically, we can bring new service providers leverage into the market because of the volumes that we in supplier relationships that we have, innovation, technology, equipment, you name it. We'll bring a litany of decisions based upon, or proposals based upon what they're trying to achieve. We put that in front of our customers, and they always have the right to change. We do not. So they will review and come back and approve a proposal, or say, no, we need to focus elsewhere at this time, or we work around the labor and real estate and energy variables of those decisions to tailor it if need be, so that it's a better integration into their facility and making sure that it's not creating any kind of disruption or anything like that. So at the end of the day, it's a program that is driven to provide a number of lean practices, one invoice, one point of contact, one PO they have to create, but we're also working on their behalf. We're not just a traditional broker that may be applying a margin or adding a markup. We have to earn our ability to be profitable by showing savings and to providing solutions. And that's how we stay in business, is by doing our job. And at the end of the day, our aim and our intent is to add value as an extension of our customers' environmental, health, safety, and sustainability teams, and develop long-term lasting relationships with those individuals.
Yeah, and you're working across what your website says is 20 different industries and 3,000 locations. That's a huge operation. But if I look at the industry specifically, do you limit yourself to a certain know-how, or these are just the industries that have come so far, but you're not averse to going into more kinds of industries, or does it require a lot of specialization that I'm going to target this industry because I know how to manage their waste streams, and examples of what those industries could be in the 20?
Sure. Well, we started very heavy in the automotive and aerospace markets, and that's a lot of what our business looked like up until 2008. And in 2008, when there were some economic impacts, that we saw, that sort of forced us at that time to diversify a bit. But you fast forward now to 2024, and we do have, I would say, primary verticals that we have developed a lot of robust knowledge in. I will say that we don't do a lot of like retail and smaller scale things. It's very commercial, industrial, but we're still very heavy in the automotive and aerospace markets. Our current, I think our most expanding market is probably the organic space, food and beverage. We've always worked within that market and had tremendous success, but we see an opportunity to really dive into that because that's a market that's not behind the curve, but there's a lot of opportunity there with our customers, both organic and inorganic, growing throughout that to provide solutions there. But we work in pharmaceuticals, and we work in electronics and a lot of heavy manufacturing. So Like the HVAC space is a big one for us, and there's a lot of opportunities where you're bringing metal into a facility and making something out of it. We've developed a lot of expertise in some of the waste streams that come out of there, like filter cakes and sludges and swarfs and a litany of different things. So we're never closed-minded. We're always very open to expanding into new markets and new verticals. We like to make sure that we perform diligence and don't jump into anything and overpromise something that we can't deliver. So as we do expand into new markets, and that's an analysis that's done on a very frequent basis, depending on the customers that approach us or the opportunities that we see, we do our work to make sure that we have the right track record, in-house expertise, and if we don't, and if we see an opportunity or there's an interest, we develop that before we dive into it. So today we're very diverse across a lot of the markets that you see, but nothing's ever off the table. We want to be a thought leader. We want to be a renowned solution provider, and we want to aim to continue to be North America's premier total waste management organization, and that comes with being open-minded not just to the markets we service, but to the solutions that are out there. So a lot of our time is spent investigating what new and emerging waste streams could be, and being driven by new technologies. I mean, I think we're starting to get past the point where I could talk about batteries as being like the new waste stream that we're doing, because we've really settled, I think, as a society into where that's very commonplace. But I mean, it wasn't that long ago, earlier this year, that we were investigating large volumes of 3D printing waste, like aluminum and water mixtures. If you know aluminum and water, it's a bit reactive, but you're getting these emerging new waste streams, and customers still want to have the ability to manage those compliantly, obviously, but sustainably, and creating not just diverting from landfill, but looking about how can we be more focused around the circular economy, and how can we create closed loop systems, and how can we bring that back into facilities, and how can we recapture that and get further and further away from the take, make, waste model, and get back into those circular approaches, which is a lot of what we do for packaging and e-waste and all kinds of different things. We've even gotten to a point now where we're working with our customers. So when they're selling their products out into the field, they can tell their customers that once that product reaches its end of life, or even if they're removing a competitor's product off before installing a new one, that they can take it, they can bring it back around, refurb it, at least recycle it, but in a lot of cases, bring it right back into the facility for some of our customers, break it down into its essential components, and put that back into production. Sorry, I said a lot there, but like you start
No,
thinking
that's
and things
totally
start rolling.
amazing. No, no, you're fine, you're fine. But of course, it leads to many more questions as well. So three parts here. Of course, you ensure that nothing goes to the landfill, and that's a difficult task on its own, because I'm sure there are things which have no kind of usage. So tell us more about. I'm going to put the questions there, but we can segregate them, and we can kind of take a shot at them one by one as well. So one is, of course, telling us that talk to us more about that challenge, because there are certain things which may not have a usage and may not combust very well. So then, what happens with that? And then I'm trying to dig into more into the kind of waste that come in, and sometimes it may be just so difficult to tackle. The second you mentioned was in terms of cost reduction, and of course, for a customer, it is a waste, and they want to incur as little a cost as possible. So I'm sure you run into that a lot as well. And how do you tackle that part? And the third is economic value. I'm sure there are certain kind of waste that can have a post kind of usage. It can be a co-product. It can become something that might have economic value. And how do you kind of share that with the customer? So I know they're kind of diverse questions, but let's
Mhm.
have you take a shot at them, and then I can come back, and if something is missed out, we can add on.
Well, even today, there are waste streams that um, must be incinerated, and they may not be incinerated through energy recovery because of their constituents, whether there's too many halogens or the off gases are not feasible by the permitting or the technology of an asset or something like that. So there are waste streams today that are you can only destroy or dispose of via incineration. It is a diminishing number of waste streams, especially when you have new entrants into the market. Like you can obviously talk about PFOS and PFOA, which is a hot topic in the waste industry, emerging regulations on that material, and how to safely dispose of it, but more importantly, sustainably dispose of it, much less recapture it from all walks of life where it touches our world. So that, I mean, that's a good one because the way that we tackle that one is we take advantage of what are the known resources today. We know what we can do with it and how to dispose of it. Unfortunately, sometimes you can only landfill something, but those are very, very few and far between. The way that we address that is by continuing to investigate and invest in solutions, technologies, vendors, resources that are working on those problems today. And it really is something that differentiates Envita Solutions from others in our space because we are backed by the power of the Heritage Group. Very large company, fourth generation global company working across all these different sectors, all of which aim to leave the world better than they found it, while being a profitable business. So they are, we have the center, the headquarters in Indianapolis for the Heritage Group, and half of that building is dedicated to one of the most advanced and premier labs in North America. So when I'm working with my customers and we have something like that comes up, yes, I'm looking at the existing success stories and solutions we've had in the past. I'm looking at the Rolodex for people that are working in that space, but we're also tapping into the Heritage Research Group. We're tapping into our venture group, Heritage Ventures. They are always looking for companies, startups that are on the peripherals of what all of our different opcos do within Heritage Group, and injecting capital in the right spaces, occasionally investing ownership in those companies so that we are on the emerging solution space for those types of things. So we have this huge ecosystem of solutions, people that we put on site that are doing investigations. So we'll always start upstream when it comes to things like that. What are you doing that is creating this downstream? Is there an opportunity to look at a more sustainable process upstream without impacting the quality, or whatever of the product that you're creating? That's not always going to be the case, but we will investigate it there. Then we will waste map the process itself to figure out all the different touch points from line to line, to department until the product is finished, to figure out, okay, what are the things that are happening here? How can we change? And it's not always just like the ergonomics or the logistics of it. It can be like the chemical formula for what they're doing in this particular space. If it's a very specified proprietary product that is built for a certain niche, that can be difficult to disrupt because of what you're actually creating. But we'll still look at those all the way down to when the waste quote hits the box. So we start there and we work our way down. Then you get to the end. Okay, well, that's fine. Well, let's look at total segregation, remove everything we possibly can that can go to different places. And that's where you have to balance the economics of it, because while you may have 5% of your total waste stream is tiny plastic caps, well, it may not be economically feasible for a volume that small that has to ship 100 miles away to the nearest outlet for somebody that can recycle it or will pay for it. So you have to kind of do these baby steps, and you have to make incremental changes for long-term transformational change. And that's a lot of the process that we take. We're very integrated with our customers, getting to know their facilities, their people, their products, and their process, so that we can have those conversations and back into their companies, their production, and back into their systems, so that we can look at things from a more holistic point of view. So PFAS and PFOA I love, because the Heritage Group has a company now, and they're completely focused on removing PFAS and PFOA from water streams, and are taking that to market now to provide solutions to customers. And now, because Envita has been working with them throughout that process and helping out with trials and pilots and things, we can bring that back into our customers who may have those problems. And we're one of the only ones that are able to do that. You can't just open Google and find like somebody that's close to home that can, hey, just take care of this. Like it's a very specific, innovative solution, and being backed by the Heritage Group allows us to take this extremely unique approach, with these right technical experts and functional leaders in these spaces dedicated to PFAS and water, and how to do that in the technology and the hard tech and all those things. So that's a lot of the process we do, which I know is a mouthful, and there's probably a way better, nice, concise way for me to articulate that. But when you're kind of passionate about something and you see all the nooks and crannies that you get to get into, like that's what excites me. So that's how we do what we do. So, and it's not just PFAS and PFOA. There's waste streams all the time that we have to take that approach. And I love the packaging aspect of it, or the packaging example, because we have it's not just like supplier partners or vendors providing disposal recycling. We have partners that work like in the packaging engineering space. So I have a really good story based out of Tennessee where we had a customer that had approximately 1,500 tons of these pallets that had styrofoam glued to it and had plastic shrink wrap they were using. And we we're trying to figure out a cost effective way, because it takes a lot of labor and cost to completely depack all those things when you have hundreds of pallets a week that are designed like that. So we looked at it from a different way. We gave them the proposal to say, look, we can do it. We can depack it all. We can break it all down. We don't want to. We can flip it all to waste the energy. Those are all expensive options. But instead, we took a year, brought in pallet engineering partners of ours, work with their engineers internally, and completely redesigned how they were doing the packaging. And what we found is that it was over engineered. Didn't need to carry that much payload. Like the moisture content, they had very specific concerns about. The aesthetics, they had very specific concerns about. So we were actually able to develop a new packaging procedure for their units that were leaving the site that was just a pallet, and then everything else was 100% cardboard OCC. And we actually found that the moisture barrier was equal or greater. We found that the payload capacity was equal or greater. They needed, partners in the process to look at, why are you doing this? Not be willing to not just run with the status quo of this is how we've always done it, and cut to the end of the scene. And, they've saved $40,000-$50,000 a year and have completely diverted all of that material that was going to landfill. And that's a win-win, right? When you can do something like that and we took advantage of the backhauls with their supplier that was giving them certain components for their direct supplies. So they saved money on transportation, they saved money on disposal, they saved money on the packaging itself, and they 100% landfill free. I mean, there was waste minimization too. Like they cut their waste in half, and the rest of it is being recycled. So that's a good success story that I think fits into. Sometimes it's not quick and easy. Like, well, you can just get it out of landfill. It takes work. It takes effort, and it takes the right people in the room being dedicated to finding a solution. But balancing that with a cost is sometimes a bit tricky, which is why you have to have. We think there's a value in having an extension to your in-house team so they can do what they're there to do. Let us help out with some of those ancillary sustainability measures that take up time, and they take expertise to do it.
No, that's wonderful because you're not just tackling like, okay, we are waste pickers, we'll pick up your waste, we'll tackle it. It's actually trying to provide a solution to the customer that can actually add value. Like you said, it reduces cost, it is better packaging, it's not over engineered, it reduces materials. So that's a very holistic approach to take because, otherwise, the mandate is to remove the waste, right? And you might just limit yourself to that. But
Yeah.
staying with the earlier questions, in terms of cost, how much pressure is there? Because I guess the customer would want to spend the least in waste removal. And are you also able to find, in some ways, are you able to find economic value
Mhm.
where the customer may actually derive value instead of incurring cost? Does that happen sometimes?
Oh yeah, I'd say we always defer to our customers and what their ambitions, their priorities are. So everybody that engages in Envita Solutions, the lion's share of the time, they're doing so because they want to be more sustainable and they need help uh, advancing that journey of their own, right? So I would say most customers are always going to be cost sensitive in some capacity. I heard one of my long-term customers once say that EHS, environmental health and safety, is rarely a contributor to the bottom line. They're usually taking away from the bottom line, like that component of the business. And he said, "Hey, you guys help us kind of flip the script on that." So I always love the way that he phrased that. And I like to share it whenever I get the opportunity. So there's always a balance there between the cost, and it is not always being sustainable and saving money at the same time. The long term play typically is, but if you're looking at a facility that is diverting 95% of its material from landfill already, and that last 5% is tricky. maybe that's the last component that you have to send to a waste to energy facility. And honestly, if you're in, I'll take Cleveland, Ohio, for an example, your nearest waste to energy facility is either Niagara Falls, New York, or Indianapolis, Indiana. And whichever way you go, it's a 6 hour drive. So they have to make that decision. It's going to cost more because landfill real estate's pretty cheap in the United States. That it's going to be cost a lot more to ship that 6 hours away and pay for incineration for energy recovery versus sending 10 miles down the road and burying it in the ground. So we inevitably have those times we bring proposals to our customer and say, this is like this is your last step on your zero waste to landfill journey or for your own sustainable goals, but it is going to be a cost. So we defer to them. The way we counteract that is that's why it's a total waste management program. We're working across the aggregation of all waste streams and all facilities. So we aim to find cost reductions and savings elsewhere that can help from a higher level fund those journeys. So at the site level, maybe we identify that we can be delayering some services, and we see a lot of instances where customers are actually sending their electronic waste and their universal waste just on an LTL route with their hazardous waste provider, and we help show them how to develop a mailback program for a much cheaper cost, which is just as convenient as throwing it on the truck that happens to be there. And if that windfall enables a $1,200 a year save, well, I mean, can that be deployed to fund a sustainability initiative elsewhere? And like that's kind of the service that we try to provide, is that holistic approach of let's find savings here to fund sustainability over here. And at the end of the day, we've been pretty successful at making those sustainability improvements as inexpensive as possible. But you're always going to have opportunities where you have a waste stream that is terribly complex, small volumes, maybe contaminated. And if the customer wants to take care of it in the most sustainable way possible, there may be a cost. So we will defer to our customers on their preference. Our job is to, as I mentioned earlier, be flexible and support them in whichever way is most appropriate for while they're partnering with us in the first place. You also mentioned generative revenue for waste streams as well, which I don't think is just as simple as segregation and packaging and equipment to transform a commodity into its most desirable form so that you can get the best rebate for it from the mill or from the market. We will also look at material and waste streams that our customers have over here that perhaps can be either used to develop a new business, a new enterprise for a larger problem or a larger feedstock. And it can be as simple as a customer has ceramic discs over here that they're struggling to get rid of, but we happen to have a customer in the battery space that can use those broken down ceramic components in their own waste stream. So when we are working as an interconnecting partner, we're trying to find how to make those synapses fire with each other and look at the logistics of it all and try to make it make sense so that one person's problem is somebody else's solution. And if you can do that, well, I mean, that's the nature of circular economy and generative revenue, because if that person is willing to pay for that and it's maybe cheaper and equivalent for where they're getting their feedstock elsewhere, but then all of a sudden the customer goes from paying for something to be disposed or paying to be recycled to generating income and still removing the waste for the facilities and solving the problem for someone else. So we love it when we're able to do that. And that takes a lot of people doing a lot of investigation into how to make that happen. And we have plenty of examples where Envita or the Heritage Group, has been able to develop an enterprise, standalone companies where we see major problems and we turn them into solutions, which turn into a business itself.
That's brilliant. Again, everything you say has such a holistic approach, which is so refreshing, in every which way, look at the customer, look at the challenge, and develop the right solution for that situation. I'm going to switch gear a little bit because, of course, for us in this show, the focus is a lot on packaging, and it'll be
Mhm.
interesting from somebody who kind of deals with the end of the pipeline perspective or domain to get a kind of and perspective on what are the most difficult packaging materials that you have to remove and you have the biggest challenges with.
It's almost not an individual waste stream. I would say the biggest challenges when you have packaging waste is the resources available, it's the logistics that are required to do things, and it's the resources available in a certain geographical area. That can be an issue, as can the volume of the material itself. If a customer comes to me and they have 20 tons of pallets a week, well, that's a no-brainer. Like, we can find a home for that, find a system. Hopefully, we set it up as this closed loop, and so that it's circular. But if they've got it's a smaller facility, because Heritage, excuse me, do that every day. Envita, still, we work with major manufacturing facilities. We also work with their distribution centers. We work with their labs, their offices, their service centers. Like, it really depends on the customer. Every brick and mortar across the spectrum for our customers usually rolls up into our program. So we get all different shapes and sizes of facilities. But if you have a site that's got 5 pallets a month and they want to take care of it in a sustainable way, I mean, it's not feasible to have them store pallets for 2 years in order to get a full truckload of pallets that may be attractive to a downstream um, buyer or vendor. So we have to get a little bit more creative in those situations. And that's where costs can build up, because you're either looking at, well, how do you invest in a piece of equipment that can crush that down and we can use it as a mulching or a composting or an absorbent component, not to mention the capacity for contamination such as metal and oil and everything else that goes into that. And on the flip side, even when you do have a customer that's got major volumes of wood and pallets and packaging, unless you can get it to where it is the same consistent grade, material, and type, full truckloads, well organized payloads, and on a consistent output, then you still have challenges. Because people look at things like pallet scrap as, well, it's wood, it should be easy, but it's really more complex and intricate than you would think. Because I mean, it'd be great if everybody had 40 by 48 open-sided GMA clean pallets on a consistent, but they don't. They're getting pallets from all different suppliers. So you have crates, and you have really long pallets, really small pallets, and broken pallets, and condensed cardboard pallets, and you have like compressed sawdust pallets. You have all these different things. So that's where it gets challenging. And I guess I am kind of moving into that pallet space because they can be challenging. But you can easily look at like PET banding as well. Like, does it make sense financially and from a labor perspective to propose the customer gets a chipper so they can feed that PET banding into a chipper so that it cuts itself up? And then how long will it take them to develop a Gaylord entire full of it that we can ship out and find a recycler who's willing to take it and pay for it? It can be difficult to find the exact right solution for the right facility, which is why often when that happens, we're working on a larger scale. We try to find out how many facilities of that customer are within close proximity, or we're looking at how many Envita customers do we have in that proximity. How do we set up an LTL route, like a limited truckload or light truckload route that can stop by and pick up from all those facilities so that they can bulk it up and then dispose of it, which gets a little bit easier, and then divide the incentives and rebates and payout back to those customers. So that's where I see challenges. It's not necessarily a particular waste stream or a byproduct, because even shrink wrap, like how many gaylords of loose shrink LDPE, loose shrink wrap does it take to put into a baler before you finally get a decent sized heavy bale? It's about 20 or so. Like, it takes a lot. So that's where it comes challenging in the packaging space from my point of view. On the waste side is getting volume, getting consistency, and getting being in an advantageous location. Or you have to kind of create the ecosystem yourself, which is a lot of what we do for our customers as well.
So you mentioned this, and it'll be interesting to dig a little more about on segregation. So of course, like ideally, like you said, the more homogeneous and bulky the material is, the easier the disposal. But we don't live in an ideal world, and I'm sure you end up getting a lot of mixed waste. So what is your mechanism for segregation, or do you get into it at all, or you tell the customer, guys, segregate and give it to us? Or is that something that you take on yourself and segregate it and see, what should go where and create economic value from that?
Yeah, no, we definitely get involved. We do have certain customers where we have Envita employees stationed on site. The largest one that I've overseen, we had over 250 people on site. Sometimes it's just one. that's not every customer that we have. It's when the opportunity presents itself and when the customer has that ask. So taking that out of the equation, when it's a non-on-site, because if that's the case, then our on-site people, we're coaching them and working with the customer to enable some of that segregation. But by far and large, it starts with the data itself. We try to figure out what they have, at least from that perspective. Any new facility, and then usually once every few years, we do go and we waste map the site. So we start with a schematic and we walk through with the team, various partners from without the facility, notate what waste is being generated where, notate where the containers are, what does the waste flow actually look like, the ergonomics, and sometimes it can be as simple, obviously, as I hate to say this, but is removing convenience for the wrong thing to be done, like removing just trash cans that are, we got 40 trash cans across 1,000 square feet and one recycling bin way over in the corner. Sometimes it's as simple as that, but more often than not, it's looking at it from the total waste mapping process and starting there, and then assisting our customers with ideas for how to improve that waste flow so that the right materials are going to the right place. You have line side recycling, making sure containers are appropriate to capture certain specific segregated waste streams at the line, at the source, instead of having them getting commingled and then distributed, catching them there. It can be providing here. Envita will provide training for our customers. We'll help with signage and containers and color coding, and like we will fully integrate and help them sort of disrupt the status quo of what the process looks like, so that the new process itself is conducive to segregation in the right commodities, waste streams, and byproducts going to the right place, so that when they does leave their facility, it's already set up to be the least cost and the most sustainable and the most compliant too in situations like that and avoiding cross contamination. So we do like to take that process, and then we bring in at a certain point our equipment team to show them, like, let's look at a baler or an auger or a densifier. I didn't even talk about styrofoam. We're talking about packaging. I don't want to talk about styrofoam, but whatever like equipment or innovation might be the most appropriate to help them accelerate wherever they are now at in their sustainable journey. And it can be as simple as telemetry too. If we're just relying on the human element to look at a big roll-off box and say, well, that needs to be picked up, that's not the way to go about doing it. To enable efficiencies and cost savings to fund the sustainable change. So we'll look at telemetry and sensors and all kinds of things that will help give real-time, data-driven analytics to make those decisions and schedule those hauls. So I mean, on and on and on. But we usually start with the basics, start with the data, mapping out where are you today, what is your baseline, and then slowly or rapidly, if it's the customer's ambitious and they want to go through it, meeting them at their pace of change and then helping them with the proposals. And then once they kind of give the green light, like it's Envita that assists with the change management. The customer is always going to have to help with their employees and things of that nature, obviously, but like Envita is the one that's taking care of the vendors and providing the solutions and the equipment, the containers, and the training. Like we will come on site and help train. Like our program managers are visiting our customers' facilities, if they're not already stationed there, at least once a quarter, and joining green team meetings and being part of their culture and part of their team. And that gives us opportunities to help present the data, and the analytics, saying this is the positive impact these changes are making. Here is how you continue to do that, and celebrating that too.
Like, yeah, it keeps ringing that, you guys are so customer focused. So, of course, in terms of scale, you're so big already. Of course, you have higher ambitions, but 1.5 million tons of waste management is what I read, and maybe you've gone beyond that now. So what I hear is a lot of waste is also exported out of the United States. So how much of that 1.5 million tons is kind of managed in the United States, and how much of it actually gets sent elsewhere for recycling or post waste management kind of approaches?
I would say the overwhelming majority of the waste streams that we manage are domestic solutions. We don't do very much, if at all, exportation of materials. We do have, sometimes you'll find an innovative solution where there's a specific vinyl chloride, plastic scrap that we can't find a really attractive solution for, but there's a company somewhere else outside of at least outside of the United States. We work through Canada, U.S., and Mexico. So we do have sometimes crossing the borders north and south out of the U.S. Very minimal at all that I'm aware of. Are we exporting any materials? We, unless we are 100% certain where it's going, transparent, cradle to grave. The very last thing Envita or any heritage group company will do is contribute to a global problem where it's somebody else's problem when it leaves our state. So we're open to those ideas, but I would say by far and large, our solutions are remain pretty domestic throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
That's wonderful as well, because the nearer the final disposal is, the better it is,
Yeah,
because
that's
otherwise, of course,
another excellent
you're
point. Yeah.
incurring a carbon footprint in transportation as well. What about composting? Is that
Mhm.
gaining momentum for you, or is that a very small part of this large waste stream? And of course, I understand that most of your collection is post-industrial, so I don't know how much of that would be compostable at all anyways. So just talk to us a little more about composting and how that's going.
I would say in most of our markets outside of food and beverage and organics, it's a very composting is a very small percent of what we do, just because when you look at all the metal and trash and plastics and there's a lot of byproducts in a typical manufacturing or right an entire enterprise's ecosystem of waste streams. It's usually a pretty small percentage that we run across, but I mean we work with organics companies and composters all over North America. In the food and beverage and organic space, we see obviously a lot more of that for good reason. I mean, we do try to make sure that safely, if there's a way to repurpose something like expired dog food or old peanut butter, so we're looking at ways to bring that back into the life cycle of the planet as a feedstock for, or excuse me, as a feedstock for livestock or something like that. Or what else can we do with it? Before, because the composting is great, it biodegrades, it gives back to the planet. Like there's lots of great things there, but we are always looking at what else can be done, either from an economic perspective or from an environmental perspective that is a give back opportunity and a sustainable or closed loop system. So in the food and beverage space, in the organic space, a lot of composting that we see over there with our customers. I mean, every facility by far and large is going, especially if they have a cafeteria, something like that, or they have even break room waste and we're capturing their coffee grinds or their banana peels and things. We always set up a composting element as part of the stations that has your plastics and your cans, and if you have waste to energy, this is dedicated to that and things like that. We'll always have a composting organics element to it. But I would say, at least for my direct portfolio over the years, it's usually a pretty small percentage that we want to cross. It's way more strategic in that food and beverage and organics space. We see a lot of that. But I mean, you've also got anaerobic digestion and like all these other things that we look into for recycling and reusing the organics themselves. And I always bucket organics and composting together. I know they can be standalone, streams depending on a few variables, but it is, it is a very widely talked about concept. When I'm attending different conferences and different initiatives and things, it's the same things are still kind of talked about as hot topics right now: batteries, scope 3, carbon in general. But composting is always still seems to be prevalent and emerging as well. Plus, I do think, like, not to go into the residential space, but I do think it's kind of forgotten about sometimes. People always are focusing on your scrap metal and your trash and your pallets and stuff, but people forget just how much food waste and biodegradable material just gets tossed in the trash. And yeah, it'll break down in a landfill, but it's also a landfill filler. It's taking up volume in space, and it's not contributing in a positive way. So if you can separate that out and redirect it to a more intentional purpose, then that's the right thing to do. So definitely are players in the organics, or excuse me, the composting space. It's just very dependent upon that particular market vertical that we're talking about, just how prevalent it is.
No, that's well said, and I understand. Of course, it's much more, and I love your idea of being able to reuse it in some ways. It's before you even look at an end of use as composting or anything else. Can it be used for animal feed? Can it be used for something else? Because that's much better in any waste stream to be able to have multiple usages. And that takes me well to something you talk about a lot, which is the 5 Rs. And
Yeah.
it'll be great to get your insights. Of course, we are in this space, but it's always good to get different perspectives of how do you see the 5 R's play with each other.
Yeah, well, it's the 5 R's is always it's really a roadmap, I guess, is the way that you look at it, and it can be deployed whether you're in the beginning of your sustainable journey or whether you're near the tail end of it, which is almost taboo to say because we're a culture of continuous improvement. We have customers that have been working with us for over 20 years, and all their facilities are zero waste to landfill, and their waste percentages are extremely small. But we're always looking, what can we do better, whether from an economic perspective or a sustainability perspective. But the 5 R's, it's well, technically it could be six because you can put refuse, right? You can put refuse at the beginning. I refuse to move into that space or to take on that new product from that perspective. You can always refuse to do something from the beginning as long as you have champions in the room. So it's almost refuse, reuse, reduce, recycle, rethink, and redesign. And I guess that redesign should really be put up towards the front because if we have, and we are extending, obviously seeing EPR and extended producer responsibility becoming more prevalent, which I'm a proponent of and think is a great thing to have that built into our society as this is recyclable, this is reclaimable, this is returnable, that type of thing already built into the system. But yeah, I think it's kind of a roadmap to anybody through any aspect, residential, commercial, industrial, wherever. If you deploy those and you refuse, or then okay, fine, redesign, or then it becomes reduce, reuse, recycle. And at the end, it is rethink, right? Like rethink. It sounds pretentious to say, but I said it not too long ago with circular in Indiana was rethink your priorities. That's really not. I mean, that's the individual at the consumer level, but it's also for the enterprise too itself, for the organization to. Yes, we want to be profitable, but at what expense? We can't solve today's problems by jeopardizing the livelihood of future generations. I mean, that's the definition of sustainability, right? So you have kind of rethink um, about future generations and the future of our planet and the future of sustainable livelihoods across the globe by the actions and the things that we're doing today. You can't be short-sighted. It's up to all of us, I think, at this point to be thinking long term about how we enable everything to work long into the future in a healthy, sustainable way.
Yeah, I usually ask this question towards the end, but you've kind of already answered it. And then the question normally is, in a certain timeline, which is like maybe 5 years, where do you see scale? And you've just kind of blown that out of the water by saying that you, as in Envita, want to be a $1 billion company. So I'm going to switch that question because it'll be great coming from you. Because our kind of focus and our show is mostly focused towards packaging and
Mhm.
packaging also in mostly in the compostable packaging segment.
Mhm.
So if you were to advise people in the compostable packaging segment who are creating new materials, who are designing new packaging, etc., etc., and then utilizing, you're using or distributing those packaging materials, what would your one advice be, looking at it from an end of use standpoint, in terms of, especially what you mentioned in the last comments in terms of design? What should the designers keep in mind to make sure compostable packaging is easy to handle for you
Keep it
as we go along?
keep it simple. I mean, there's if you're looking at compostable packaging, biodegradable materials for packaging and the like, it can still create issues if that particular packaging conflicts with the standards, permitting, and specs of an end user, whether they're a composter or what have you. So keeping it simple is probably my best piece of advice because we all know that there is a litany of change both at the micro level and the macro level that needs to happen to our society to enable a full transformation into a true circular economy. And that's obviously a huge value and a huge step in that direction. But a lot of the problem comes into changing people's habits and integrating into existing systems and things. So I would say the simpler that you can keep it, um, what's the anagram KISS? Keep it simple, silly. That's probably my first piece of advice is to bear that in mind. My other um, piece of advice, and maybe this falls outside the scope of your question, but I'd also recommend that they themselves look at insetting into their own value chain so that they while they're creating the sustainable product and enabling transformational change across um, the economy. I hope they're also looking up their own value chain and insisting upon the same level of commitments from the people that they partner with, which I know again sounds a little bit outside of scope, but if you deploy a systems thinking, you have to be doing, I think, both in tandem. You have to be, even if you're a sustainable enterprise or providing a sustainable product, you also have to be insisting that the collaborators throughout your entire ecosystem are like-minded and championing the same intentional strategy together. So probably not exactly what you're looking for there, but I think that's important. And anytime you can give what you would consider advice to your peers and colleagues throughout the sustainability ecosystem, like you got to reiterate, like you got to insist, that everybody's rowing in the same direction, and that is what we need to be doing now to enable pretty rapid transformational change in order to accommodate not just science-based targets, but limit our global negative externalities long term. So that's what I would say.
No, those are both golden nuggets and very connected actually. So the first one, when you were saying, one of my kind of coaches, gurus early on used to say the miss-kiss theory. Make it simple, stupid. Keep it
There,
simple, stupid.
there you go. I like
And
that.
that kind of reminded me of that. And the second bit is, yeah, second bit is really important as well. What you talked about, not just in terms of the whole systems thinking as where is your material coming from, but also sometimes we forget in making a good product. You might make a product that's really easily compostable, easy to break down, but you are using a very harmful process to create it, or you are consuming too much water or heat
Yeah.
or what have you, and different raw materials. We was recently talking about metallizing paper substrate. The metal would do the right work for creating the water vapor barrier, but the process it creates so much waste of polyethylene because the metal comes adhered to polyethylene, and then the polyethylene goes away, and then you're trying to send that into a recycling stream. So the consumer doesn't see that, right? So it is us as producers who have to be very cognizant of that. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And of course, that takes me to my final question. But if you want to add anything more to that, would be happy to hear. But my final question always is, what is good garbage to you? And you would be a master at this. So I'm very excited to hear your answer.
It's a lot of pressure, but good garbage to me is just it's a mantra to move forward and recognizing that this widget that holds my phone, someday is going to be somewhere else beyond my desk at home, right? It's going to be in the landfill, or it's going to be lost in the woods, but hopefully maybe I can figure out exactly what to do with this. And I always like to tie it back down to the residential aspect. My kids and I, like locally, they stopped doing recycling for us. So we collect all of our recycling at home, do segregation. And every Saturday we have a family trip to the next county over where they will take commingled recycling, right? So to me, that's good garbage, right? You have to start with your habits as an individual. And I hope, and I know that it's a luxury, it's a privilege for me to say that we do that because not everybody can afford to have the time, dedication, or financial position to make that a priority in their life. So it's really easy for me to say, hey, you should do this, but we all need to be cognizant that there there's 300 billion people on this planet, and not all of them are in the best position to have the luxury to make those decisions. So it's up to those that can, I hope, to lift others up and enable meaningful change to make it easier for everyone to be able to do those things. So I mean, good garbage is us on a very holistic, broad level, all sorry, rowing in the same direction again, and that's a big lift and a big ask. But if I hope, I hope that's where we end up.
It's wonderfully said. Not the answer I would have expected, Sean. I thought you were going to answer something from the perspective of large scale garbage, but I think it's so appropriate what you said. It's each of us, it's each of our habits, and knowing that, where our own trash is going, because it's one drop at a time. Thank you so much. This has been such an illuminating conversation. I think you are there in such a complex situation, but it's so wonderful for me to see a company that is so customer focused and holistic in its approach. So it's been a great learning for me. Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for the work you're doing and everybody in your team is doing. And I think the world is a better place for that. So thank you so much, Shaun, for your time.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what you do and bringing awareness to sustainability, particularly in the packaging and composting, and continue to give a voice to people within that space who are driven towards change. So thank you as well.